She was backed into a corner, trembling not from fear of the city's most dangerous man, but from the crushing weight of her family's cruelty. Looking up at the ruthless syndicate boss, she whispered, "Can you pretend to be my husband?" Without a second of hesitation, he replied, "Forever." Madeline Hayes was a woman who took up space, and she had spent her entire life being punished for it. At 32, she was a senior art appraiser for Sotheby's, possessing an encyclopedic knowledge of Renaissance masterpieces and an eye that could spot a forgery in a pitch-black room. She was brilliant, fiercely independent, and unapologetically fat, a fact that her mother, Victoria, treated as a terminal disease and a personal failure. The penthouse at 432 Park Avenue smelled of old money, beeswax, and danger. Madeline stood before a massive canvas, a magnifying loupe pressed to her eye, her breathing shallow. It was a Caravaggio, a lost Caravaggio, to be exact. The penitent Magdalene. It had vanished during the Second World War, yet here it was, resting on a heavy mahogany easel in a penthouse overlooking the Manhattan skyline. She documented the brush strokes, the chiaroscuro, the distinct craquelure of the 17th century paint. But her mind was fraying. The heavy oak doors of the study were closed, but she knew the men waiting outside were armed. Her client was a ghost in the high society art world, Dominic Rousseau. The whispers about him in the gallery circuits were hushed and terrified. I was a legitimate businessman on paper, the CEO of Rousseau Logistics, but the FBI had spent the better part of a decade trying to prove he was the head of the largest organized crime syndicate on the eastern seaboard. Madeline didn't care about his Mafia ties. She cared about the authenticity of the oil on canvas. Then her phone buzzed. The jarring sound of the standard iPhone ringtone shattered the silence of the room. She glanced at the screen. Mother. Madeline closed her eyes, a heavy sigh escaping her lips. She shouldn't answer. She was in a hostile environment, doing a highly sensitive job. But Victoria Hayes had a habit of calling the Sotheby's executive office if Madeline ignored her personal calls. With a trembling finger, Madeline swiped right and pressed the phone to her ear. "I am looking at the seating chart, Madeline." Victoria's sharp, reedy voice snapped before Madeline could even say hello. "Harper's wedding is in 3 days at the plaza. You still haven't given me the name of your +1. Are you bringing someone, or are you just going to sit at the singles table and eat half the wedding cake? Because frankly, I've already spoken to the seamstress, and that size 20 bridesmaid dress is an eyesore next to the other girls." "It's a size 18, Mother," Madeline whispered, her voice tight, tears of sheer humiliation pricking the corners of her eyes. "And I told you, I am bringing someone." "Oh, really?" Victoria scoffed, the sound dripping with maternal venom. "Is this like the boyfriend you supposedly had at Thanksgiving? The one who conveniently got food poisoning?" "Stop lying, Madeline. No one expects you to find a husband. Just come alone, wear something dark that slims you down, and stay in the background so you don't ruin Harper's photos." "Something inside," Madeline snapped. A lifetime of biting her tongue, of shrinking herself down to appease a family that despised her very existence, shattered into a million jagged pieces. "I'm not bringing a boyfriend, Mother," Madeline said, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "I'm bringing my husband. We eloped, and he is going to sit right next to me at the head table." Silence stretched over the line, followed by a cruel, disbelieving laugh. "You? Married? Do not play these games with me. If you aren't walking through the doors of the grand ballroom with a husband, I will have security escort you out of your sister's wedding. The line went dead. Madeline lowered the phone, her hands shaking violently. A sob ripped from her throat, echoing in the cavernous, vaulted study. She dropped her face into her hands, the heavy, manicured nails digging into her scalp. She had done it now. She had backed herself into an impossible corner. Where in God's name was she going to find a fake husband in 72 hours? A size 18 is perfectly proportional for a woman with your bone structure. Your mother lacks an eye for classical beauty. Madeline gasped, spinning around so fast she nearly knocked over a priceless Ming vase. Stepping out from the shadows of the velvet curtains was Dominic Rousseau. I was taller than she had imagined, dressed in a charcoal brioni suit that clung perfectly to the broad, muscular lines of his shoulders. His hair was dark, threaded with the faintest traces of silver at the temples, and his eyes were a startling, piercing amber. He looked like violence wrapped in Italian silk. He had heard everything. Madeline's face burned a furious, mottled red. "Mr. Rousseau, I didn't realize you were in the room. I apologize for the disruption. The painting is authentic. I can draft the paperwork." "You need a husband," Dominic interrupted, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. He walked slowly toward her, his footsteps completely silent on the Persian rug. He stopped a mere 2 feet away, looking down at her. He didn't look at her with the pity or disgust she was so accustomed to from the men in her social circle. His amber eyes swept over her full hips, the heavy curve of her breasts, and the soft lines of her face with a predatory, calculating hunger. I was just arguing with my mother. It's nothing. Just family drama," Madeline stammered, stepping back until her spine hit the edge of the mahogany table. "Family is never nothing," Dominic murmured. He tilted his head, studying her. "You are cornered. You lied to a woman who clearly despises you, and now you have no way out. If you show up alone, you will be publicly humiliated. If you don't show up, they win." Madeline swallowed hard. She was terrified of him. But his blunt assessment of her life was so shockingly accurate, it knocked the wind out of her. The desperation bubbling in her chest suddenly overrode her common sense. She was standing in front of a man who owned half the judges in New York, a man who commanded legions. "I have money," Madeline blurted out, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I have a substantial trust fund, and my salary is excellent. I can pay you. Or I can appraise your entire underground collection for free. Off the books." Dominic's eyes narrowed. "Pay me for what, exactly, Miss Hayes?" Madeline squeezed her eyes shut, took a deep breath, and looked the Mafia boss dead in the face. "Can you pretend to be my husband, just for 3 days, just to get me through this wedding?" The silence in the penthouse was absolute. Adeline waited for the laughter. She waited for the mockery. She waited for this terrifying, beautiful man to have his guards throw her out onto 57th Street. Instead, Dominic Rousseau reached out, his warm, calloused fingers gently brushing a stray curl of hair behind her ear. The touch was so tender, it made her breath hitch. "Forever," he replied, his voice a deadly, absolute vow. Madeline blinked, stunned. "What?" "I don't do things temporarily, mia cara," Dominic said, stepping closer, closing the distance between them. "I will be your husband. I will stand by your side at this wedding. I will make your mother choke on her own venom. But in return, The marriage is real. We sign the papers. We say the vows." "Are you insane?" Madeline whispered. "You don't even know me. Why would you want to marry me?" Dominic's lips curved into a dark, knowing smile. "Because, Madeline, the heads of the Sicilian clan are old-fashioned men. They do not trust a boss who has no wife, no roots, no respect for the sanctity of a home. I need a legitimate, respectable woman on my arm to secure a merger that will make me untouchable. A Sotheby's appraiser with a pristine background and a trust fund. You are the perfect cover." He stepped back, adjusting his cuffs. "And besides," he added, his gaze dropping to her curves once more, lingering with unabashed appreciation, "you are exactly my type. I like a woman with substance. I will pick you up tomorrow at 8. We have rings to buy." The next 48 hours passed in a chaotic, dizzying blur of unimaginable wealth and terrifying realities. Dominic was a man of his word, and when he took control, he did it with the precision of a military general. The marriage license was procured in less than 2 hours, bypassing every legal wait time in the state of New York, through a judge who looked like he was about to faint when Dominic walked into his chambers. They signed the papers in the back of a bulletproof Maybach. Madeline's hand shook as she wrote her name. Madeline Hayes Russo. "Relax," Dominic said softly, pouring her a glass of Macallan 25 from the car's crystal decanter. "It is just ink." "It's my life," she countered, taking the glass and downing the scotch in one burning gulp. "My family is going to investigate you. Liam, my sister's fiancé, works in corporate law. He thinks he knows everyone in the city." "Let him investigate," Dominic chuckled, a dark, dangerous sound. "He will find that I am a very wealthy, very boring logistics magnate who fell madly in love with a brilliant art appraiser." True to his promise to make her mother choke, Dominic refused to let Madeline wear the off-the-rack dresses she had brought for the wedding weekend. Instead, he had Bergdorf Goodman shut down their 3rd floor. He didn't steer her toward the dark, slimming, shapeless sacks her mother always forced upon her. Instead, he had the tailors drape her in emerald green silk, rich ruby velvet, and gold-threaded brocade. He celebrated her fatness, demanding cuts that highlighted her waist and showcased her cleavage. For the rehearsal dinner at the Plaza's Edwardian room, Madeline was fitted into a custom, deep sapphire wrap dress that clung to her heavy curves like a second skin. Around her neck, Dominic fastened a vintage Harry Winston diamond collar, a piece that weighed heavy against her collarbones and sparkled with blinding ferocity. "You look like a queen," Dominic murmured, standing behind her in the mirror, his hands resting possessively on her wide hips. "Like a woman who owns the room." "I look like a target," Madeline whispered back, though she couldn't deny the flush of confidence rising in her cheeks. For the first time in her life, she felt beautiful. Not beautiful for a big girl, just undeniably, devastatingly beautiful. When they arrived at the plaza, the air in the Edwardian room was thick with the scent of white roses, expensive perfume, and the low hum of Manhattan's elite. Madeline hesitated at the double doors, panic suddenly gripping her throat. Dominic felt her stall. He smoothly interlaced his fingers with hers, bringing her hand to his lips to press a firm kiss to her knuckles. "Head high, Mrs. Russo. They are nothing but ants. Step on them." They walked in. The reaction was instantaneous. Heads turned. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Sight of Madeline, usually the quiet, frumpy sibling hiding in the corners, striding in with the confidence of a goddess, dripping in millions of dollars of diamonds, and holding the arm of a man who radiated lethal magnetic power, was a shock to the system. Victoria Hayes, dressed in a severe Chanel tweed suit, nearly dropped her crystal champagne flute. She stared at Madeline, her eyes darting frantically from her daughter's radiant face to the massive 5-carat emerald-cut diamond resting on Madeline's left ring finger. Harper, the bride-to-be, was standing with Liam. Harper was thin, blonde, and conventionally stunning, but next to the sheer presence of Madeline and Dominic, she suddenly looked terribly plain. Victoria recovered first, pasting on a sharp, fake smile as she marched toward them, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. "Madeline," Victoria said, her eyes narrowing into slits as she looked Dominic up and down. "You actually came. And you brought a friend." "Husband," Dominic corrected smoothly, his tone polite but laced with an icy edge that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. He extended a hand. "Dominic Russo, it is a pleasure to finally meet the woman who raised my brilliant wife." Victoria reluctantly shook his hand, flinching slightly at his iron grip. "Russo? I don't believe I know the family. What is it you do exactly?" Madeline has always had a habit of picking up strays from the bohemian art crowd. Behind Dominic, Madeline's underboss, a towering, heavily scarred man named Giovanni, who was posing as their driver and security, let out a low, menacing chuckle. Dominic waved a hand, silencing him instantly. "I am in logistics, shipping, and imports." Dominic lied effortlessly, his amber eyes locking onto Victoria's. "But my true full-time job is ensuring that Madeline is treated with the immense respect she deserves, something I hear she has been sorely lacking." Harper pushed past her mother, her eyes glued to the Harry Winston necklace. "Maddie, where did you get that? That's real. That has to be a rental." "It's an heirloom," Dominic answered for her, stepping slightly in front of Madeline, shielding her from her sister's envious glare. "Purchased for her at auction in Geneva, only the best for my wife." Liam, Harper's fiancé, puffed out his chest, stepping up with the arrogance of a junior partner at a law firm. "Russo Logistics, huh? I know the corporate sector well. I've heard some interesting rumors about your company's union negotiations down at the docks." Dominic turned his gaze to Liam. The look was entirely devoid of emotion, like a predator examining a particularly annoying insect. "Rumors are often the product of men with too much time and too little power. I assure you, Liam, our negotiations are always final." The underlying threat was so palpable that Liam physically took a step back, the color draining from his face. Madeline stood taller, a thrilling, intoxicating rush of power surging through her veins. For 32 years, she had been the punching bag. Now, she was untouchable. She leaned into Dominic, resting her head against his shoulder. He immediately wrapped a strong, protective arm around her thick waist, pulling her flush against his side. "We just wanted to stop by and give our regards, Mother," Madeline said, her voice steady and clear. "We'll see you tomorrow at the ceremony. Come on, darling. Let's get a drink." As Dominic guided her toward the private bar, leaving her family standing in stunned, intimidated silence, he leaned down and whispered against her ear. "You see? Ants. And tomorrow, at the wedding, we burn the whole anthill down." The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was transformed into a sickeningly lavish wonderland of white orchids, cascading crystal chandeliers, and towering champagne pyramids. It was the social event of the season, a crowning achievement for Victoria Hayes. Yet, as the hundreds of wealthy guests mingled, their eyes were not on the bride. They were fixed on the back corner table, where Madeleine and Dominic held court like royalty holding an audience. Madeleine wore a custom-tailored, off-the-shoulder gown, spun from midnight blue silk. The heavy, luxurious fabric draped flawlessly over her thick thighs and accentuated her full hips, cinched tightly at her waist by a corset that pushed her ample cleavage up to perfection. She looked nothing short of spectacular. Dominic sat beside her, his arm draped casually over the back of her chair, radiating a dangerous, quiet authority that kept the other guests both captivated and completely terrified. Throughout the evening, Madeleine watched her family unravel. Harper, desperate for attention, had thrown a minor tantrum during the cutting of the cake when she realized the photographer was spending more time capturing the mysterious, terrifyingly handsome billionaire at her sister's table than the groom. Liam was sweating profusely, having spent the last 2 hours discreetly making phone calls to his corporate law contacts, trying to find any legitimate record of Russo Logistics' board of directors. He had found nothing, which only terrified him more. Victoria finally reached her breaking point. Armed with a flute of Dom Perignon and a bitter, twisted scowl, she marched over to their table, pulling a chair out and sitting uninvited. "I don't know how much you are paying him, Madeleine," Victoria hissed, leaning in close so her voice wouldn't carry over the string quartet, playing softly in the background. "But this charade ends tonight. You have ruined your sister's wedding. People are asking questions. Liam's partners are asking questions." Madeleine felt a familiar, cold knot of shame try to form in her stomach. But before she could speak, Dominic's hand clamped down over hers, his thumb stroking her knuckles in a grounding rhythm. "The only questions they are asking, Victoria," Dominic said, his voice a low, lethal purr, "is how a woman as breathtaking and brilliant as Madeleine could possibly share genetics with a bitter, shriveled husk of a woman like you." Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. "Excuse me. You have no right to speak to me that way. I am a respected member of New York high society. I know the mayor. I know." "You know nothing," Dominic interrupted softly. He leaned forward, his amber eyes completely devoid of mercy. "You spent 32 years emotionally starving my wife because she did not fit into your pathetic, narrow definition of beauty. You made her feel small because you are entirely hollow. If you ever speak to her with anything less than absolute reverence again, I will buy your husband's brokerage firm, liquidate it, and leave you begging for scraps on Fifth Avenue." Victoria's face drained of all color. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words died in her throat. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom swung open with a violent crash. The string quartet screeched to a halt. 5 men in dark suits stepped into the room. They weren't wedding guests. They moved with a synchronized, predatory grace, their hands slipping inside their jackets. Madeleine, having spent the last few days in Dominic's world, instantly recognized the heavy, bulging shapes hidden beneath the fabric. Guns. Dominic's demeanor shifted in a microsecond. The polite, icy billionaire vanished, replaced by a ruthless syndicate boss. He grabbed Madeleine by the waist, yanking her out of her chair with terrifying strength. "Get down!" Dominic roared. Chaos erupted. Screams tore through the ballroom as the first shots were fired, the deafening cracks echoing off the gilded ceiling. Crystal chandeliers shattered, raining down on the panicked elite of New York. Victoria screamed, diving under a table covered in expensive caviar. "Lucchese family," Giovanni, Dominic's towering underboss, shouted over the gunfire, pulling a customized Glock from his shoulder holster. "They tracked us, boss!" "Keep her completely covered," Dominic commanded, shoving Madeline behind the thick marble pillar near the bar. He drew his own weapon, a sleek, terrifyingly efficient firearm, and stepped out from behind the pillar with lethal calm. Madeline watched, her heart hammering violently against her ribs, as her fake husband engaged in a full-blown Mafia shootout in the middle of her sister's wedding. Dominic moved with terrifying precision. He didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. He dropped two of the heavily armed assassins before they even reached the dance floor. Liam was huddled behind the wedding cake, openly weeping, while Harper shrieked hysterically in a corner. The contrast was jarring. The men her family worshipped were cowards in the face of true danger, while the man they had mocked was a shield of unyielding steel. Within 3 minutes, it was over. Dominic's security detail had neutralized the threat. The ballroom was completely destroyed, littered with broken glass, crushed orchids, and groaning men. Dominic holstered his weapon, his chest heaving slightly. He turned, striding through the wreckage, his eyes frantically scanning the room until they locked onto Madeline. He rushed to her, his large, blood-spattered hands gently gripping her face, checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt? Madeline, look at me. Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. "Fear. I'm okay," she whispered, her hands trembling as she reached up to touch his chest. "I'm okay, Dominic." From under a ruined table, Victoria crawled out, her Chanel suit ruined, her face pale with absolute horror. Who are you?" she stammered, staring at Dominic's gun. "You're a monster. You brought the Mafia to my daughter's wedding." Dominic didn't even look at her. He kept his eyes locked on Madeline, his thumb brushing a speck of dust from her cheek. "I brought truth to your daughter's wedding, Victoria. And the truth is, you no longer have a second daughter. She belongs to me now." He turned to Giovanni. "Clean this up. Leave no trace for the NYPD. We are going home." The ride back to the penthouse was completely silent. Madeline sat in the back of the Maybach, staring out at the blurring city lights, trying to process the sheer magnitude of what had just happened. She was married to a mobster. She had witnessed a shootout. She was permanently, irrevocably severed from her toxic family. And yet, for the first time in her life, she felt completely free. When they walked into the penthouse, Dominic shed his ruined suit jacket, tossing it onto a leather chair. He walked over to the mahogany bar, pouring 2 heavy glasses of bourbon. He handed one to Madeline, his eyes dark and unreadable. "I am sorry," Dominic said quietly, the gravelly baritone of his voice subdued. "The Lucchese state has been contesting a port merger. I thought they would have the honor to leave a civilian event untouched. I endangered you. That was never part of the deal." Madeline took a slow sip of the burning liquor. She looked at him, really looked at him. The broad shoulders, the lethal hands, the sharp, intelligent eyes. "You said you needed a legitimate wife for the commission. You said I was the perfect cover." "I lied," Dominic confessed, the blunt admission hanging heavy in the air. Madeline blinked, confusion washing over her. "What?" Dominic set his glass down and walked toward her. He stopped inches away, looking down at her with a raw, fierce vulnerability that made her breath catch. "I don't give a damn what the Sicilian Commission thinks of me," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I own them. I didn't need a cover, Madeline. I needed an excuse." He reached out, his hand gently tracing the curve of her waist, settling firmly on her hip. "I have been watching you for 6 months, ever since you walked into the private Christie's auction and tore down a fraudulent Renaissance buyer in front of 100 people. You were magnificent, fierce, brilliant, and beautiful. God, Madeline, you are so incredibly beautiful." Tears pricked her eyes. "Dominic, no one looks at me like that. My own mother." "Your mother is a fool who measures worth in dress sizes because she lacks the intellect to measure anything else," Dominic interrupted fiercely. "I bought the Caravaggio just to get you in this room. I paid a small fortune on the black market for the penitent Magdalene, because I knew Sotheby's would send their best appraiser, and I knew it would be you." Madeline gasped, the pieces suddenly falling into place. "The painting, the meeting, it was all a setup, just to meet me?" "Yes," Dominic admitted without an ounce of shame. "I am a ruthless man, Madeline. When I see something I want, I take it. But I knew a woman like you wouldn't just agree to dinner with a man like me. When I heard you on the phone, desperate, backed into a corner by those vultures, I saw my opening. I took it." He dropped to one knee, looking up at her. The billionaire king of the criminal underworld kneeling before a fat, brilliant art appraiser who had spent her whole life believing she was entirely unlovable. "The paperwork is real. The ring is real. But I want the marriage to be real too," Dominic said, his amber eyes burning with absolute devotion. "I want your mind, your curves, your fire. I want to build a legitimate emir with you. Use your connections. Use my money. We will open the greatest gallery in the world. But I need to know if you can accept the darkness that comes with me." Madeline looked down at him. The fear was gone, replaced by a blazing, undeniable heat. She had spent 32 years shrinking, hiding, apologizing for her existence. Dominic Russo didn't want her to shrink. He wanted her to take up the entire world. She reached down, her fingers tangling in his thick, dark hair. "I don't want a pretend husband anymore, Dominic." A slow, devastatingly handsome smile spread across Dominic's face. He stood up, wrapping his massive arms around her waist, lifting her effortlessly against his chest. "Good," Dominic murmured, right before his lips crashed down onto hers in a searing, possessive kiss. "Because I meant what I said, Mrs. Russo. Forever." Together they walked away from the shadows, stepping into a future where no one would ever dare make Madeline Hayes feel small again. Did Madeline make the right choice, trading a toxic family for a dangerous, devoted Mafia king? Let us know in the comments below. If you loved this intense story of revenge, romance, and claiming your true power, make sure to hit that like button. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who love a good Mafia romance drama, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, dramatic stories every single week. Turn on notifications so you never miss an episode.